Okay, welcome everyone to, we're going to vote today on the budget of the state of Maryland. As we get going, I just want to say a couple of words. It's no surprise today we're going to be making some cuts to programs that are really near and dear to us, including our community colleges, probably the most significant cut today. Our four-year institutions, cuts to our state parks and our critical maintenance. Additionally, we're going to be using a lot of one-time funds to shore up our budget. Rainy day fund, our revenue volatility fund, we're going to be taking that down to zero with the proposals you have before us. That's a fund meant to stave off tough economic times and be money there for us. Unfortunately, these are things that we have to do, and there are things that the governor, the Senate, and the House are in concurrence that we need to do this year. And with those cuts, there are also great things in this budget. Protection of priorities that we all share, like the blueprint, record funding for pre-K, communities in poverty, English learners, special needs. So while the budget has a lot of great priorities protected, it also has some red flags. And I think it's important for us to recognize those red flags, because when we take up the BRFA, we will also be able to sort of restore some of these cuts, not the least of which are transportation cuts that we've seen in highway user, which is roads and bridges, in our lots, which is our local bus systems, Maryland Transit Authority, and the like. And I think other priorities are going to be protected in concert with the governor and the Senate as well. We're going to have in our BRFA protection of our trauma fund and funding for that. So I think that's important, because I think that these are shared values. Marylanders don't want to live in a state with falling bridges, buses that don't show up when they're trying to get to work, children who don't get the support they need in public schools. And, businesses and nonprofits don't want to invest in a state that frankly doesn't invest in itself. So today we're going to pass a budget that I think protects our priorities, given our existing resources, but also makes a statement to increase revenue so that we can protect our priorities for the out years. I think that's something we can all be proud of. I know our subcommittees have been hard at work all year, and I'm certainly proud of them. So without further ado, we'll start with our Education and Economic Development Subcommittee. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and all distinguished members of the House Appropriations Committee. I'm Delegate Stephanie Smith, Chair of Education and Economic Development, here to present our report to the full committee. I would first like to begin by thanking the members of my subcommittee. First of all, Vice Chair, Delegate Kevin Harris, Delegate Carl Anderton, Delegate Catherine Forbes, Delegate Jefferson Greist, and Delegate Sarah Wolek. You've been just very committed this entire session, and it's been an honor to work with you all. And of course, we're able to be successful because of the dedicated committee staff that support us. Michelle Lambert, Carol Smith, Jewel Harris, and the budget analysts, Natalie Andrade, Sarah Baker, Patrick Frank, Emily Haskell, Laura Hyde, Kelly Norton, Jacob Polikoff, Micah Richards, and Elizabeth Weibel, and Dominic Sanelli, who edited this document. I will now turn over to my Vice Chair, Delegate Harris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Beginning on page 1, the subcommittee adopted narrative for the study on the CAVE funding formula. For historic St. Mary's City Commission on page 2, the subcommittee concurred with the Senate to add language restricting funds pending a report. For the Interagency Commission on School Constructions on page 3, the subcommittee rejected intent language for the School Safety Grant Program. On page 4 and 5, for the West North Avenue Development Authority, the subcommittee concurred with the Senate to add language restricting funds pending a report. The subcommittee also reduced funding for grants to non-governmental entities. For the State Lottery and Gaming Control Agency on page 6 and 7, the subcommittee concurred with the Senate to adopt 2 pieces of narrative requesting reports. For the Maryland Department of Labor on page 8 through 11, the subcommittee reduced funds for workforce initiative and concurred with the Senate to reduce special funds. The subcommittee concurred with the narrative requesting a study and modified narrative requesting a report on prisons to honest jobs. On page 12, for MSDE headquarters and the Maryland Center for School Safety, the subcommittee concurred with the Senate to reduce special funds and general funds and add special funds as a replacement for the School Resource Officers Program. Also in the MSDE headquarters on page 13 through 16, the subcommittee concurred with the Senate to adopt 4 pieces of narrative requesting reports. The subcommittee modified the Senate narrative requesting a report on education support professionals. The subcommittee also adopted narrative requesting a study for the State School for the Arts. On page 17 through 25, the MSDE Aid to Education, the subcommittee concurred with the Senate on 6 pieces of narrative and 1 piece of language requesting reports and modify requirements for a report. The subcommittee also rejected language restricting funds pending a letter on a MOU. For MSDE funding for education organizations on page 26 through 29, the subcommittee concurred with the Senate on annual language for the aid to non-public schools and boost programs.
For the Accountability and Implementation Board on pages 30 and 31, the subcommittee concurred with the Senate to add language restricting funds. Turning to Morgan State University on page 32, the subcommittee adopted 2 pieces of narrative requesting reports on East North Avenue development and on a financial well-being coach. For University of Maryland College Park, on page 33, the subcommittee adopted narrative requesting a report on a financial well-being coach. On pages 34 through 39, for the Maryland Higher Education Commission, the subcommittee concurred with the Senate to restrict funds pending a report and reject language restricting funds pending a report on MHEC's financial aid website. The subcommittee added 3 pieces of language restricting funds pending a report on the status of implementing the recommendations of the program approval work group. The subcommittee also concurred with 2 pieces of narrative requesting reports. On page 40, for MHEC aid to community colleges, the subcommittee concurred with 2 pieces of narrative requesting reports. For MHEC student financial assistance on page 41, the subcommittee concurred with narrative requesting a report. On page 42 and 43 for higher education, the subcommittee concurred with 2 pieces of narrative requesting reports. For Baltimore City Community College on page 44, the subcommittee concurred with narrative requesting a report. On pages 45 and 46 for the Maryland School for the Deaf, the subcommittee concurred with language restricting funds for a report and narrative requesting a report. For the Department of Commerce on pages 47 and 48, the subcommittee concurred with the Senate and on a technical amendment to reduce funds. The subcommittee also modified language specifying use of funds in the Preservation of Cultural Arts program. Turning to the Maryland Economic Development Corporation, on page 49, the subcommittee modified narrative for a report on sensitive compartmented information facilities. On page 50 for the Maryland Technology Development Corporation, the subcommittee adopted narrative requesting a report on investments made by TEDCO. Finally, on page 51, the subcommittee adopted language restricting funds pending a report on a survey of publicly funded pre-kindergarten programs. I would like to move adoption of the subcommittee report.
And discussion on the subcommittee report. Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, raise your hand. Subcommittee report is adopted. Thank you both for your great work.
Thank you, Chair.
Great job. Move to Health and Human Services. And I should mention the documents are online. So if you'd like to follow along, if you're watching on the Zoom or you're here in person, the documents are online. So they should be available for you there.
Good afternoon, committee.
Chair, Madam Vice Chair, welcome.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Chair. So first, we want to take a moment to thank the members of our subcommittee, of course, Vice Chair, Delegate Dana Jones, Delegate Gabriel Acevero, Delegate Jim Heinbaugh Jr., Delegate Alethea McCaskill, our committee staff, Joe Gutbertlet, who's been just a joy to work with, and our committee support, Carol Smith and Jewel Harris. The budget analysts, Natalie Andrade, Ann Braun, Emily Haskell, Naomi Kimura, Victoria Martinez, Samuel Quist, and Tanya Zimmerman. And I'd like to thank Claire Austin Washburn, who edited this report. I'll turn the floor over to our Vice Chair now.
Beginning on page 1, with the Office of Deaf and Hard of Hearing, the subcommittee concurred with the narrative requesting a report. On pages 2 and 3, in the Department of Disabilities, the subcommittee concurred with 2 pieces of narrative requesting reports. On page 4 and 5, in the Department of Aging, the subcommittee concurred with 3 pieces of narrative requesting 3 reports. In the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights, on page 6, the subcommittee concurred with narrative requesting the agency to include caseload data in its annual Managing for Results submission. On page 7, in the Maryland Institute for Emergency Medical Services Systems, the subcommittee concurred with narrative requesting a report. On page 8, in the Maryland Health Benefit Exchange, the subcommittee concurred with narrative requesting a report. Actions related to the Maryland Department of Health are beginning on page 9. In the Maryland Department of Health Administration, the subcommittee concurred with language restricting funds pending a report and narrative regarding the status of resolving audit findings. In addition, the subcommittee modified narrative requesting a report on the agency's overdose response. In the health professional boards and commissions, beginning on page 12, the subcommittee concurred with language restricting funds for 3 health boards pending a report and narrative requesting a report on the Board of Nursing. Actions related to public health administration begin on page 14. The subcommittee concurred with 2 pieces of language restricting funds pending reports.
In the Prevention and Health Promotion Administration, beginning on page 17, the subcommittee did the following. Further reduced funds for the Center for Firearm Violence Prevention and Intervention and made a corresponding technical change. We concurred with 3 pieces of narrative requesting reports on vacant positions. We concurred with language restricting funds pending a report on the Prenatal and Infant Care Grant Program, and we modified language related to the Pediatric Cancer Fund to alter reporting requirements. Actions related to the Behavioral Health Administration begin on page 23. The subcommittee modified language that restricts funds pending a report on the recoupment of overpayments to providers and the transition to the new ASO to increase the amount of funds restricted. The subcommittee concurred with language restricting funds pending submission of certain data, narrative requesting a report, a technical amendment on contingent language, and 5 pieces of annual language on pages 26, 39, and 40 that restrict funds for provider reimbursements for behavioral health services or transfer among those programs and Medicaid. In the Developmental Disabilities Administration, beginning on page 27, the subcommittee concurred with annual language restricting funding in the Community Services Program to that use only. The subcommittee also concurred with 2 pieces of language restricting funds pending reports. The subcommittee also adopted narrative requesting a report on self-directed services. Under Medicaid, beginning on page 31, the subcommittee concurred with language restricting funds pending a report on corrective actions for repeat audit findings and added 2 pieces of annual language shown on pages 31 and 39, restricting funds for provider reimbursements to that purpose. The subcommittee concurred with 7 pieces of narrative requesting reports. In addition, the subcommittee modified narrative relating to the recruitment and retention of anesthesiologists. On page 38, the subcommittee also concurred with a reduction of double budgeted funds. Beginning on page 41 in the Health Regulatory Commissions, the subcommittee modified narrative on ambulatory surgical facilities to request 2 reports and modify requirements. In addition, the subcommittee concurred with language restricting funds pending a report and language expressing intent related to work group on emergency department and hospital throughput. However, the subcommittee rejected language that would have expressed intent about procuring a referral and data reporting platform. The subcommittee also concurred with 2 pieces of narrative requesting an evaluation and a report. Subcommittee actions pertaining to the Department of Human Services begin on page 46 with the Department of Human Services Administration. The subcommittees concurred with 2 pieces of narrative requesting a report.
Actions pertaining to the Social Services Administration begin on page 48. The subcommittee concurred with language restricting funds pending the resolution of repeat audit findings, language restricting funds pending a report, and narrative requesting a report on implementation of federal legislation. The subcommittee modified narrative requesting a report on hospital stays by youth in out-of-home placements to request regional or jurisdictional data. In the foster care maintenance payments program and child welfare services, beginning on page 52, the subcommittee modified language to increase the amount of funds restricted pending a report on the planned use of funds for foster care provider rate reform. And on pages 52 and 54, the subcommittee concurred with two pieces of annual language restricting funds to the intended purposes. The subcommittee also concurred with reducing a portion of proposed fiscal 2024 general fund deficiency appropriation for the foster care maintenance payment program. In the local family investment program on page 54, the subcommittee concurred with language specifying the use of grant funds and requesting a report. In the assistant payments program, starting on page 55, the subcommittee concurred with language restricting funds in the program to that purpose with limited exceptions.
In addition, the subcommittee modified two pieces of language to reduce the amount of funds transferred for administration of the summer EBT program to another program, and reduced funds not transferred due to expected lower costs for administration. The subcommittee also concurred with a reduction of general and federal funds based on anticipated program spending and special funds that will not be available. The subcommittee also concurred with two pieces of committee narrative requesting quarterly reports and a report on implementation of a new program. On pages 61 and 62 in the Child Support Administration, the subcommittee concurred with language reducing general and federal funds and authorizing special funds to replace the reduced funds, narrative requesting performance data, and narrative requesting a report on vacant positions. In the Office of Home Energy Programs on pages 63 through 65, the subcommittee concurred with four pieces of narrative requesting reports. Lastly, in the Department of Housing and Community Development on page 66, the subcommittee concurred with deleting funds that were double budgeted and narrative requesting information on the designation of just communities.
Move the adoption of the subcommittee report.
Second.
Been seconded. Any discussion on the subcommittee report? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, raise your hand. The ayes have it. The subcommittee report is adopted. Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, great work.
Thank you.
We'll move to public safety. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to start that it's a special honor that two Prince George's boys gets to do this.
Absolutely.
I would like to thank the members of the subcommittee, of course, my vice chair, Delegate Julian Ivy, Delegate Mark Chain, Delegate Ryan Spiegel, Delegate Susan McComas, Delegate Josh Stanko, Ken Weaver, who staffs the subcommittee, our budget analyst, Jacob Cash, Victoria Martinez, Madeline Miller, Jacob Palikoff, Yashadara Rai, Micah Richards, Samantha Tapia, and Elizabeth Wabel and Brett Ogden for formatting and editing the document.
On pages 1 through 4 in the judiciary, the subcommittee concurred with language reducing funds to align with actual spending more closely and to reduce double budgeted funds. The subcommittee also concurred with language restricting funds for the implementation of DeWolf v. Richmond and concurred with narrative requesting a total of 6 reports. In the Office of the Public Defender on page 5, the subcommittee concurred with language restricting personnel funds to be used only to increase salaries and with narrative requesting 1 report. On page 6 of the Office of the Attorney General, the subcommittee concurred with narrative requesting quarterly reports on the Access to Counsel and Evictions program. On pages 7 and 8,
In the uninsured employers fund, the subcommittee concurred with language restricting funds pending a report and with narrative requesting a report from a work group. On page 9, in the Board of Public Works, the subcommittee concurred with narrative requesting audited financial statements as well as quarterly reports on attendance. On page 10, in the governor's boards, commissions, and offices, the subcommittee concurred with narrative requesting a report on agency MBE participation attainment and liaison surveys. On page 11, the subcommittee concurred with narrative requesting a report from the Secretary of State regarding the status of vacant positions. On page 12, in the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention and Policy, the subcommittee concurred with language restricting funds pending a report on Victims of Crime Act awards and funding. On page 13, the subcommittee concurred with language reducing funds by increasing the turnover rate for new positions to 25%. The subcommittee additionally concurred with narrative requesting a report on invoice and payment methodology. On page 14, the subcommittee concurred with language restricting funds pending proof of the hiring of a state director for a Safe Streets site in Baltimore City. The subcommittee also concurred with language restricting funds from being distributed to law enforcement agencies until agencies attest that employees have completed training on juvenile interrogation requirements. The subcommittee also concurred with language reducing general funds for state aid for police protection enhancement funding in order to reroute those funds for police accountability and warrant-related grants. On page 15, the subcommittee concurred with language restricting funds pending receipt of a statutory report.
On page 16, in the Maryland Commission for African American History and Culture, the subcommittee concurred with language reducing funds that were double budgeted. On page 17, in the State Board of Elections, the subcommittee concurred with narrative requesting quarterly reports on all major IT development projects. On page 18, in the Military Department, the subcommittee concurred with narrative requesting reports on TRICARE reimbursements for the National Guard and Free State Challenge Academy. On pages 19 and 20 in the Maryland Department of Emergency Management, the subcommittee concurred with narrative requesting 2 reports. On page 21 in the Department of Veteran Affairs, the subcommittee concurred with narrative requesting quarterly reports on the status, staffing, and ratings of the Charlotte Hall Veterans Home. On page 22 in the Comptroller of Maryland, the subcommittee concurred with narrative requesting that tax filing data be submitted with the fiscal 2026 budget. The subcommittee also concurred with narrative requesting a report. On page 23, the subcommittee concurred with a reduction of funds that were double budgeted. On page 24, in the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Cannabis Commission, which is new, the subcommittee concurred with narrative requesting that information on cannabis violations be submitted with the fiscal 2026 budget. On pages 25 through 28, in the State Department of Assessments and Taxation, the subcommittee concurred with language restricting funds pending 2 reports on staff vacancies. The subcommittee additionally concurred with language restricting funds pending 2 reports on a major IT project and cybersecurity. The subcommittee rejected language and adopted expanded language requiring a report on ESTAT property tax assessments that were not mailed and restricts funds pending that report. On page 29, in the Department of General Services, the subcommittee concurred with added language restricting funds. The subcommittee also concurred with narrative, which requests 2 reports. On pages 31 through 34 in the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, the subcommittee concurred with 1 piece of language regarding administration. The subcommittee modified a 2nd piece of language restricting funds pending a report on the development of apprenticeship programs. The subcommittee concurred with narrative requesting a total of 4 reports regarding justice reinvestment, correctional programs, recidivism, and inmate medical contracts. In the corrections area of the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services on pages 35 through 40, the subcommittee concurred with 2 pieces of added language that restricts funds pending a report. The subcommittee also concurred with 3 pieces of narrative requesting reports. Additionally, on pages 41 and 42, the subcommittee adopted narrative requesting a report on the woman's pre-release programming. In the community supervision area of the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services on pages 43 and 44, the committee concurred with 2 pieces of narrative requesting reports. In the Police and Correctional Training Commission within the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services on page 45, the subcommittee concurred with language restricting funds pending a report. On pages 46 and 47 in the Department of Juvenile Services, the subcommittee concurred with two pieces of language restricting funds pending submission of reports on juvenile facilities and out-of-home placements, and concurred with narrative on juvenile alternatives to detention. The subcommittee adopted narrative on page 48 that requests a report on the Thrive Academy, as well as additional narrative on page 49, requesting a report on the Maryland Youth Residence Center project.
On page 50 through 53 in the Department of State Police, the subcommittee concurred with language reducing incorrectly budgeted funds. The subcommittee also concurred with two pieces of narrative requesting reports. The subcommittee also adopted a reduction of general funds due to increasing the budget turnover rate for new positions. On page 54, the subcommittee concurred with the addition of a section and restriction of funds for the annual uniform crime report. That includes our subcommittee report. Motion to move the subcommittee report.
There's a second.
All right. The subcommittee report has been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the subcommittee report? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Raise your hand. The ayes have it. Subcommittee report is adopted. Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, great work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our last standing committee, Transportation and Environment. Right, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Delegate Courtney Watson, Chair of Transportation and Environment, and I would like to thank the very able subcommittees, my Vice Chair, subcommittee members, my Vice Chair Delegate Edelson and Delegates Mangione, Metzger, Delegate Ruff, and Delegate Solomon. I would also like to thank our committee staff, Ken Weaver, and committee support Carol Smith and Jewel Harris, and the Department of Legislative Services Budget Analyst Carrie Cook, Andrew Gray, Steve McCullough, Samuel Quist, Yashadera Ray, and Samantha Tapia, and Kately Cannon and Callie Ingerson, who edited this document.
For the Public Service Commission, on pages 1 and 2, the subcommittee concurred with the Senate to adopt modified Senate narrative regarding restrictions on utility termination during extreme temperatures, and adopted narrative on the impact of renewable portfolio standards compliance costs on ratepayers. For the Maryland Energy Administration, on pages 3 through 5, the subcommittee concurred with the Senate to adopt two pieces of narrative regarding safe revenues and expenditures and federal grant funding. The subcommittee modified narrative concerning the use of safe revenues transferred to the dedicated purpose account in fiscal 2025 and adopted new narrative requesting a report on the administration of revenues sourced from alternative compliance payments.
On page 6, for the Maryland Automobile Insurance Fund, the subcommittee concurred with the Senate to request quarterly financial statements. On pages 7 through 9, for the Maryland Insurance Administration, the subcommittee concurred with the Senate on one piece of narrative and adopted two new pieces of narrative on the rate and file and use activity and on methods for determining auto insurance rate affordability. On pages 10 through 14, for the Department of Information Technology, the subcommittee concurred with the Senate to add language restricting funding pending reports on information technology project requests, cybersecurity assessment remediation, and timelines for completing certain cybersecurity related actions. The subcommittee also concurred with the Senate to increase the turnover rate for new positions to 25%, consistent with statewide practice, and to adopt two pieces of narrative. Actions related to the Maryland Department of Transportation begin on page 15. The subcommittee concurred with the Senate to add annual budget bill language requiring notification of changes to the capital program and capital grants, restricting operating grants, setting debt limits, and requiring debt reports. The subcommittee adopted new narrative requesting a report on impacts to the capital program from cost increases in the Purple Line Light Rail project. The subcommittee also adopted new narrative on efforts to combat fare evasion.
In the State Highway Administration, the subcommittee adopted narrative requesting bicycle lane data and safety information about a trail and road crosswalk. In the Maryland Port Administration, the subcommittee concurred with the Senate to adopt narrative expressing intent and adopted new narrative requesting status reports on the Howard Street Tunnel project. On pages 25 through 27 in the Motor Vehicle Administration, the subcommittee added language restricting funds pending a report on the ignition interlock program, concurred with the Senate to adopt narrative on improper out-of-state tags, and rejected narrative regarding the uninsured motorist fee. In the Maryland Transit Administration, the subcommittee concurred with the Senate to add language and adopt narrative. On page 30, for the Maryland Transportation Authority, the subcommittee adopted two pieces of narrative requesting reports on bicycle and pedestrian lanes at MDTA facilities and on collecting outstanding tolls from out-of-state motorists. Items related to the Department of Natural Resources begin on page 32. The subcommittee concurred with the Senate to adopt six pieces of narrative requesting reports and rejected two pieces of narrative concerning Merkle Wildlife Sanctuary and a mentored hunt program on conservation easements. The subcommittee also added new language restricting funds pending a report on the diversification efforts in the Natural Resources Police and adopted two pieces of narrative on a fee and penalty structure, reporting and funding for state-owned lakes.
On pages 40 through 42 in the Department of Agriculture, the subcommittee rejected narrative concerning a mentored hunt program on agricultural easements and concurred with the Senate to adopt two pieces of narrative requesting reports. The subcommittee adopted new narrative on electric vehicle charging station inspections. In the Department of Environment, on pages 43 through 46, the subcommittee concurred with the Senate to adopt four pieces of narrative and one piece of language restricting funds pending a report on the budgeting of personnel expenditures. The subcommittee adopted new narrative on Advanced Clean Cars 2 program. On pages 47 and 48 for the Maryland Environmental Service, the subcommittee concurred with the Senate to adopt narrative requesting a funding statement and added new narrative requesting a report on compensation for executive level staff. The subcommittee has one additional action for consideration that would restrict funds in the Maryland Department of the Environment pending information regarding funding for the Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission. Move the adoption of the subcommittee report as amended.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, raise your hand. The ayes have it. Great work.
Thank you.
Subcommittee report is adopted. And now turn to capital budget pay-go, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, Mr. Chair, capital.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the House Appropriations Committee. I would like to thank the members of the subcommittee, the Vice Chair, Delegate Jazz Lewis, Delegate Catherine Forbes, Delegate Jefferson Grice, Delegate Julian Ivey, Delegate Rick Metzger, Delegate Emily Shetty, Delegate Stephanie Smith, Delegate Jared Solomon, and Delegate Courtney Watson. Committee Counsel, Michelle Lambert, the committee support, Carol Smith and Jewel Harris, and the budget analysts, Sarah Jean Baker, Carrie Cook, Andrew Gray, Emily Haskell, Laura Hyde, Madeline Miller, and Yashara Rai, and Caitlin Cannon, who edited this document.
The subcommittee concurred with the Senate on page 1 and reduced the fiscal 2024 general fund pay-go appropriation for the school construction revolving loan fund by $20 million in the Interagency Commission on School Construction. On page 2 in the Department of General Services, the subcommittee deleted fiscal 2024 grant funds for the new Institute for Health Computing at the University of Maryland, Baltimore campus. On page 3 in the Department of Housing and Community Development, the subcommittee concurred with the Senate and adopted narrative requesting a report on broadband infrastructure expansion. Move the adoption of the subcommittee report.
Second.
Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, raise your hand. The ayes have it. Mr. Chair, we'll see you for the capital budget in a few weeks. But good work.
Thank you.
We have full decisions next, but we're just gonna break for 2 minutes, so just stay where you are. Okay, all right, we're back. We're gonna move through our full committee option decision document. Welcome to our DLS friends who are gonna walk us through it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You should have 3 documents on your desk that we'll be going for. There is a big packet, says decision documents. There is a smaller stapled packet that is the Budget and Reconciliation and Finance Act tally sheet. And there is a blue packet of additional items. The analysts will be just going through the decision document in page order. When an item in the decision document refers to the BRFA, the analyst will refer you to that to do that item. And then at the very end, all of the items that don't have budget actions will be gone over to finish out the BRFA process there.
And just for housekeeping, what we're gonna do is similar to how the Senate handled this. The vice chair will make a motion on each, but I won't call roll on each action item. We'll just call roll on the full decision document at the end. However, if anyone would like to pull any of those out and pause, has questions on any, item, just let us know. We'll stop, we'll talk about it, and we can vote on each individually if you'd like. Otherwise, we will roll through.
Okay, page 1 on the decision document packet. For payments to civil divisions, DLS recommends a committee narrative requesting a report on disparity grant amount calculation after the adoption of bracket-based income tax beginning tax year 2023. The agency concurs and Senate adopts.
Yeah, on page 2 for the General Assembly of Maryland, the recommendation was to concur with the Legislative Policy Committee. The Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
The Governor's Office for Children begins on page 3. The first action is a technical amendment to include the bill numbers for the NF Act and also to reflect the DLS recommendation, changing the amount of funding held contingent. The first House modified the DLS recommendation as they did not take the recommended cut.
Mr. Chairman, move to adopt the DLS recommendation.
The second item is the $10 million DLS recommendation cut to the Enough Act grant program. The agency disagreed with this recommendation and the Senate rejected.
Mr. Chairman, move to reject.
And I just want to pause here because obviously this is an important item for the governor. We are going to be restoring $10 million to Enough priorities later in ads. We will get to that. That includes a hub to really build out the Office of Children to be an Office of Children in Poverty. And we think it's just going to broaden the scope of that office. So it shows as a cut here, but I think it's going to be added back. Just wanted everyone to be aware of that. We'll see that in ads.
The third item appears on page 4. DLS recommended increasing the turnover expectancy for the positions that will be starting in fiscal 2025. The agency disagreed and the first House rejected.
Mr. Chair, move to concur with the Senate.
Okay.
Item 4 is for the out-of-home placements report. This report is generally requested annually. The Governor's Office for Children asks that funds not be withheld from itself. The Senate modified the DLS recommendation, which can be found beginning on page 6 to not withhold funds from the Governor's Office for Children.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Okay.
On page 9 for the Maryland Cannabis Administration, the DLS recommendation was to concur with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred and the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
On page 10, this is the Interagency Commission on School Construction. The DLS recommendation is to delete $10 million in general funds for the School Construction Revolving Loan Fund. The next page has a related technical item to strike the contingent language, and the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
This item is related to item number 3 in your BRFA packet, which has the same recommendation, which the Senate adopted. But there's an alternative. There's an additional action for your consideration on page 7 that would repeal the fund and transfer $40 million of the fund balance to Blueprint for Maryland's future fund.
To adopt the color page.
Okay. Moving an unused fund into the Blueprint fund, it's more money for that. Okay.
On page 12 is the Maryland Thoroughbred Racetrack Operating Authority. DLS recommendation was to concur, agency concurred, Senate adopted. Mr. Chair, move to concur the Senate. On page 13 is some additional narrative that the Senate added to the bill. This requests quarterly reports from Pimlico, Laurel Park, and the Bowie Racetrack about the progress of those projects. Mr. Chair, move to concur the Senate.
Page 14 begins the Department of Planning. The DLS recommendation was to delete $250,000 in general funds budgeted for the Maryland 250 Commission, as there was over $450,000 in funding appropriated in prior years still available for this purpose. The agency disagreed and the Senate rejected.
Mr. Chairman, move to adopt the DLS recommendation.
On page 15 is an additional action adopted by the Senate, putting contingent language on that $250,000. So rejecting the previous action would result in a rejection for this action as well.
Mr. Chairman, move to reject.
There's also a color page for your consideration on page 1 of your blue packet. This is committee narrative regarding school enrollment projections, giving intent that school enrollment projections be as accurate as possible and asking the department to work alongside DBM and DLS in terms of the accuracy of these school projections.
Mr. Chairman, move to adopt the color page.
Items belonging to the Department of Budget and Management, Office of the Secretary, begin on page 16 of the decision document. The first action was a DLS recommendation restricting funds pending a report on unencumbered balances in state fiscal relief fund programs from ARPA. The agency agreed and the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
The second DLS recommendation requests that performance measures be developed for the Audit and Finance Compliance Unit. The agency agreed and the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
The third DLS recommendation is found on page 17 and strikes language that would eliminate the requirement to print budget books. There's a corresponding item on the BRFA tally sheet on page 2, item number 16. So if you adopt the DLS recommendation, you would want to reject the BRFA item.
Mr. Chairman, move to reject.
DLS recommendation number 4 starts on page 17 of the decision document packet and requests that budget details be submitted on contracts and grants. The agency agreed and the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Item number 5 for DBM Secretary starts on page 18. This amends the budget bill as submitted to limit items allowed to be placed in contingency reserve to those items restricted by the General Assembly only. The agency disagreed, but the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Item number 6 begins on page 19 and amends the budget bill as submitted to add a tracking structure necessary for legislative audits and to disallow transfers of restricted funds for other purposes. The agency disagreed, but the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Item number 7 for DBM begins on page 20. This item is a new recommendation to authorize transfer of rainy day funds to cover anticipated entitlement shortfalls in Medicaid and a few other areas. The agency agreed and the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Item number 8 on page 22 of the decision document is an annual recommendation to require long-term executive forecasts. The agency agreed and the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Item number 9 begins on page 22 and applies across the board reductions to institutions of higher education. The agency agreed and the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Item number 10 begins on page 23 and requires annual reporting of federal funds received by the state. The agency agreed and the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Item number 10 begins on page 23 and requires annual reporting of federal funds received by the state. The agency agreed and the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Item number 11 on page 24 defines policies under which federal funds may be used in the budget. The agency agreed and the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Item number 12 begins on page 25. This requires state agency budget data and organizational charts to be presented consistently. The agency agreed and the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Item number 13 begins on page 27. This requires reporting on and approval of interagency agreements. The agency agreed and the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Item number 14 begins on page 29 and continues on through page 32. This language defines the budget amendment process. The agency agreed and the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chair, move to concur with the Senate.
Item number 15 begins on page 32. This language requires the maintenance of accounting systems for certain purposes. The agency agreed and the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chair, move to concur with the Senate.
Item number 16, the last DLS recommendation for this budget begins on page 34 and requires notification when a state agency applies for a federal grant with a state match. And it requires that DBM submit quarterly reports summarizing all competitive grant applications. The agency agreed and the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chair, move to concur with the Senate.
The Senate also adopted an additional page found on 36 of the decision document packet. This action continues the requirement of state agencies with cybersecurity related repeat audit findings to report their progress on remediation plans to the State Chief Information Security Officer and the Office of Legislative Audits.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Thank you.
On page 38 in the Department of Budget and Management Personnel, item number 1, DLS recommended a $36,000 reduction to increase the turnover expectancy for a new position. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Mr. Chair, move to concur with the Senate.
Item number 2, DLS recommended annual committee narrative requiring a report on the health insurance closeout. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
On page 39, item number 3, DLS recommended annual narrative requiring quarterly reports on the medical, dental, and prescription plan. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Item number 4 on page 40, DLS recommended language restricting funds intended for a salary increase for employees who have been employed since 2019 to instead be used for a general salary increase for employees on the standard and correctional officer salary scales. The agency disagreed and the Senate rejected this recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Item number 5 on page 40, DLS recommended reducing funding by $40 million total, or about $25 million in general funds to reflect higher than expected vacancy savings. The agency disagreed and the first house adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Item number 6, still on page 40, DLS recommended deleting funding for the fiscal 2025 annual salary review. The agency disagreed and the Senate rejected.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Moving to page 41, item number 7, DLS recommended reducing funding by just under $25 million or about $21.6 million in general fund for the supplemental pension contribution. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
On page 5 of your BRFA tally sheet, items number 106 admin and 106 DLS alternative. The administration introduced an amendment to the BRFA to reduce the required reinvestment contribution. That is what this reduction was part of, from 75 million to 50 million. And DLS recommended altering that to also repeal a requirement to reduce pension contributions by certain administrative fees.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Back in your main decision document, page 41, item number 8, DLS recommended annual back of the bill language requesting a report, setting requirements on abolished positions. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Item number 9, DLS recommended annual language regarding IWIF reporting. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
On page 42, item number 10, DLS recommended annual language setting limits on the creation of positions outside of session. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Moving ahead to page 44, item number 11, DLS recommended annual language requiring reporting on the number of authorized positions in the state. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
On page 45, item number 12, DLS recommended annual language requiring reporting on health insurance spending and income. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
And on page 47, the Senate adopted language restricting funds pending a report on the state health plan's compliance with the Federal Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
The Senate on page 48, the Senate also adopted committee narrative requiring reporting on an update on the implementation of recommendations for modernizing state personnel recruitment.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
I would then direct you to the additional page in your blue packet, page number 2. This is additional language restricting funds in DBM pending a report on the establishment, the establishment of a pilot program for a 4-day work week for state employees.
Mr. Chairman, move to adopt the color page.
Back again in your main decision document on page 50 in the State Retirement Agency. DLS recommended reducing special funds by $8.9 million that are double budgeted in other state agencies. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
In the State Retirement Agency on page 51, the Senate adopted committee narrative requesting a report on the impact of catastrophic injuries on law enforcement officers' pension benefits, and the Senate adopted that.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
And on page 53 in the Maryland Supplemental Retirement Plans, DLS recommended concurring, the agency concurred, and the first house adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
The Department of Service and Civic Innovation begins on page 54. Items 1 and 4 can be thought of together. The DLS recommended increasing the turnover expectancy for new positions to 25%. The agency concurred and the first house adopted items 1 and 4.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate on items 1 and 4.
Items 2 and 5 can also be thought of together. DLS recommended reducing the general fund appropriation for the Maryland Core program to a level consistent with expected Maryland service year pathway participation and service year option pathway participation. The agency disagreed as this will not allow them to provide as many wraparound services, and the Senate rejected.
Mr. Chairman, on items number 2 and 5, adopt the DLS recommendation.
And then item number 3 was the DLS recommendation to reduce the general fund appropriation for education and training contracts. The agency disagreed as it provided another use of the funding in its written testimony, and the Senate rejected.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
On page 56 and 57, the Senate also adopted 2 pieces of committee narrative. The first was for state or local government agencies to report their core participants after the first year of the program.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
The second is a report on the wage subsidization that partner organizations supply to program participants.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
On page 58, State Highway Administration, this was a DLS recommendation regarding highway user revenue, which would have taken the state share back to the 9.6 prior to 2020. The Senate rejected this action.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Page 59 is the Department of Natural Resources. The recommendation there was to cut around $6.7 million and then backfill it with program open space state land acquisition balance funding as part of a BRFA provision. The agency disagreed with this. The Senate did adopt it. The accompanying BRFA provision is on page 5 of your BRFA tally sheet. Near the bottom, it's 107 DLS additional. And that provides for the transfer of the program open state balance funding to backfill the general fund cut.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
And while you're still in the BRFA tally sheet on page 3, on that last item for the highway user, there was a provision in the BRFA as introduced by the administration, which would reduce the rate in 26 and 27. The Senate rejected that item. And also there was a DLS alternate recommendation, which I'm sorry, the other one was on the bottom of page 2, and this one's on the top of page 3, which would have been the DLS recommendation you've already rejected. So the DLS alt you would reject or concur with the Senate. You still have
Chairman,
bottom of page 2.
Move to concur with the Senate.
On page 60 of the main packet, under the Behavioral Health Administration, DLS recommends adding language to the special fund appropriation, authorizing the use of $5 million from the Senior Prescription Drug Assistance Program for Behavioral Health Services. The Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Related to this, in your BRFA tally sheet at the bottom of page 4 are 2 items, 101 administrative alternative and 101 DLS additional.
The first, permanently expand the allowable use of the fund to include the kidney disease program and behavioral health services for people without insurance, which the Senate adopted. And consequently, the next one, which would have authorized the use of these funds in fiscal 2025, only the Senate rejected.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Turning back to the main decision document on page 60, the second recommendation amends language reducing the amount of funding that would be transferred from 3 health boards to the Behavioral Health Administration. The Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
And then related to this, back to the tally sheet on page 3, about halfway down the page, item number 30 is a provision that would authorize the transfer of these funds. The Senate modified the amount of the transfer in order to leave a greater balance in the boards.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Under Medicaid, so staying on the Burfa tally sheet, page 3, item 31 would authorize the transfer of special funds, about 200,000 to Medicaid. The Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
So then back to the decision document, there are 2 items under Medicaid that are related to that. The first is technical to change the contingent language on the general fund. The agency concurred, the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
And then item 2 is also technical. It strikes contingent language on federal funds as this action actually transfers special funds. The agency concurred, the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
So then actually I'm going to turn to the blue additional packet. There's 2 other Maryland Department of Health items. So on page 3, under Health Regulatory Commissions, the Community Health Resources Commission, this item would reduce $100 million in special funds from blueprint funding for the Consortium on Coordinated Community Supports. That's due to the delayed timing of the consortium grant distribution.
Mr. Chairman, move to adopt the item on the color page.
Okay, and I think we need to go back to page 2 of your Burfa tally sheet, item 23, 34, and 35. What we meant to do here is reject the Senate and restore the funding for highway user. I think this is a big difference between Senate action, House action. We know that these highway user funds are relied on for roads and bridges for our locals. Disproportionately, this cut would affect Baltimore City. And we are going to restore, and we think it's a responsible restoration given the transportation package that we will be adopting, I hope, later in the Burfa. So we will be rejecting the cut to highway user. That is on page 2 of your packet.
Yeah, so item 23, you're saying you want to reject, but you can concur with the Senate on DLS alt, which was a deeper cut, which you've indicated you don't want to do. So
yes, that's correct.
23. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. And then there's one additional Maryland Department of Health item in the blue packet on page 7. This is a Burfa item that would, or I'm sorry, not page 7. Sorry, the next one.
Page 4.
No, I think it's page 8. Sorry.
Where did you go?
Yep, page 8. This is a Burfa item that would require the Maryland Consortium on Coordinated Community Supports to procure a closed loop referral and data reporting platform.
Mr. Chairman, move to adopt this item on the color page.
Thank you.
Okay, on page 62 and 63 for MHEC and the Salinger formula, these are 3 actions added by the Senate that relate to item 7 in your Burfa document on page 1, which altered the funding for the Salinger formula. The actions for the Senate are shown in your decision document and reflect modifying the Burfa to alter the formula to increase the per FTES funding. So the first action strikes the contingent reduction.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
The next 2 actions modifies the Burfas and specifies the allocation of the funds. However, in your blue package on page 4 and 5, I have an alternative for your consideration, which would replace the Senate actions for 2 and 3, which would modify the Burfa and specify the allocation by institution.
Mr. Chairman, move to adopt the color pages.
On page 64, we have aid to community colleges. The additional first house action was to adopt a technical amendment to alter the contingent reduction to reflect the modification to item 6 on page 1 of the Burfa tally sheet, altering the state aid per FTEs to 27.2%.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Next up is the Department of Housing and Community Development. I'll start with the BRFA tally sheet on page 1. Item 9. This item would alter the mandate for the Business Facade Improvement Program to allow the use of general obligation bonds to satisfy the mandate, and the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Related to this, back in the main packet on page 65, DLS recommended deleting the general funds $5 million for the program that were contingently reduced by the BRFA, as the program is fully funded using general obligation bonds. The agency concurred and the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
The second item is language striking the contingency, a technical amendment, and the Senate adopted this.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Also, the next thing I have for you is in the blue packet on page 4. This relates to the Maryland Department of Labor. And this page would reduce funding for EARN, but then add back the same amount of funding to be used through EARN for a leasing agent training program.
Mr. Chairman, move to adopt color page.
The public debt is on page 66. DLS recommend concurring. Agency concurs with how adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
On page 67 in the State Reserve Fund, DLS, first item, DLS recommends striking language that's not necessary to make the reduction to the revenue stabilization account appropriation necessary. And the second item would make that reduction of $495 million. The agency concurred with both of these actions and the Senate adopted both.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
And then related to this, on page 2 of your BRFA tally sheet, item number 18, as introduced, this provision removes the requirement to make this appropriation, and the Senate,
Mr. Chairman, number 18 on the BRFA sheet, concur with the Senate.
Items 3, 4, and 5 are technical corrections related to the appropriations for the OPEB trust fund and the retirement reinvestment contributions. The agency concurred with all 3 and the Senate adopted all 3.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate on these items.
Item number 6 on page 68, DLS recommended adding language restricting the appropriation to the dedicated purpose account related to the demolition of the State Center complex, pending a report on how the funds would be used. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
And then on page 69, items 7 and 8, DLS recommend making those reductions that I mentioned previously to the OPEB sweeper and the pension sweeper of $25 million each. The agency concurred with both and the Senate adopted both.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur on both items to the Senate.
And then on page 2, again, in your BRFA tally sheet, items 17 and 19 are related to these provisions. The Senate rejected both of those provisions.
Mr. Chairman, items number 17 and 19 on the BRFA tally sheet, concur with the Senate.
Item number 9 on page 69, DLS recommended adding language to the appropriation in the dedicated purpose account of funds from the CEF fund, making that appropriation contingent on passage of the BRFA. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
And then on page 4 of your BRFA tally sheet, items 33 and 33 DLS alt. This is the language in the BRFA that would authorize that transfer of the CEF as introduced. The language authorizes the transfer, and then the DLS alternative would specify the distribution of the CEF funds by account, which would increase the distribution from administration and restrict funds coming out of energy assistance. And the Senate adopted the DLS alternative.
Mr. Chairman, on the BRFA tally sheet number 3 and number 33, DLS alternative concur with the Senate.
Back to the main decision document, page 69, item number 10, DLS recommended reducing the deficiency appropriation of to the catastrophic event account by $9.4 million, leaving a balance in that account of $10 million. The agency disagreed and the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
That moves.
On the BRFA tally sheet, we're going to go through the rest of the items that haven't already been covered. So if you start on page 1 with item 1, this provision eliminates the mandate for the Maryland Native Plants Program and the Native Plant Specialist position. The Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, on item number one on Burford tally sheet, reject Senate action and strike original provision.
Item 2 is in the Office of Attorney General. It eliminates the mandate for the Consumer Protection Division and authorizes special funds to be used to support the division. The Senate modified this to take the action in fiscal 2025 only.
Mr. Chairman, on number 2 on the Burford tally sheet, reject Senate action and adopt the original provision.
Item 4 alters the allowable use of the blueprint funds provided to the coordinated community supports through the CHRC to include reimbursement for school-based behavioral health services. The Senate rejected.
Mr. Chairman, on item number 4, the Burford tally sheet, reject Senate action and adopt the original provision.
Item 5 was a provision that removes the prohibition on implementing a freeze in the child care scholarship program enrollment. The Senate modified to require a 60-day notice before implementing an enrollment freeze.
Mr. Chairman, on number 5 of the Burford tally sheet, reject the original provision and modify to prohibit increasing co-pays above those in effect January 1st, 2024. Great.
Item 8 is a provision that removes a prohibition on DDA setting a dollar cap for self-directed and family-directed goods and services. The Senate rejected.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Item 10 eliminates the mandate into the Fisheries Research and Development Fund in fiscal 2025 only, and the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Item 11 is a provision that reduces the mandate for the Mel Nolan Woodland Incentives and Fellowship Fund. The Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, on item number 11 on Burford tally sheet, reject Senate action and strike original provision.
Item 12, as introduced, allows the funds from the Chesapeake and Coastal Bay 2010 Trust Fund to satisfy the mandate for the Tree Solutions Now Act of 2021, beginning in fiscal 2025. Item 12, admin alt at the top of page 2, clarifies that the intent of the provision is to support the costs beginning in fiscal 2024. And the Senate adopted both of those provisions.
Mr. Chairman, on the Burford tally sheet, item 12 and 12 admin all concur with the Senate on both items.
On the top of page 2, item 13, reduce the mandate would reduce the mandate for the warrants and absconding grants. The Senate rejected.
Mr. Chairman, on number 13 of the Burford tally sheet, concur with the Senate.
Item 14, as introduced, reduce the amount of the funds reserved due to the revenue volatility cap under the revenue volatility adjustment to $100 million in fiscal 2025 and 2026 only. 14 admin alt right below that instead would adjust the cap to 0 in fiscal 2024 and 2025, but leaving the $100 million in fiscal 2026. The Senate modified that to do the fiscal 2024 and 2025 portions only, and then maintain current law for 2026.
Mr. Chairman, on item number 14 on the Burford tally sheet and 14 admin all concur with the Senate on both items.
Item 15 redirects interest from a variety of special funds to the general fund, and the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate on this item.
Item 20 reduces the lottery agent commission for sales from 6% to 5.5%, and the commission for the cashing of a winning ticket from 3% to 2%. The Senate modified to keep the cashing of winning ticket change, but modified the sales commission change to 5.75%.
Mr. Chairman, on item number 20 with the lottery ticket sales commission 5.75% concur with the Senate.
Item 21 was a provision to modify the required state of good repair funding for MTA in fiscal 2025 only. 21 DLS alt was a recommendation to strike the provision because the supplemental budget actually struck the contingent language, and the Senate struck the provision.
Mr. Chairman, number 21 and 21 all concur with the Senate.
Item 22 eliminates the requirement that MTA purchase only zero emission buses and instead requires at least 25% of purchases be zero emission. The Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur.
On the top of page 3, the second item down, item 24 eliminates the requirement for registration stickers on license plates, and the Senate rejected.
Mr. Chairman, move to reject Senate action and adopt the original provision.
Item 25 eliminates the mandate for the Public Broadcasting Commission. The Senate rejected.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Item 26 repeals the small business relief tax credit. The Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
As introduced, the item 27 authorized a transfer of $40 million from the state unemployment insurance reserve account to the general fund in fiscal 2025. 27 admin alt increased the transfer to 60 million, and the Senate adopted the $60 million transfer.
Mr. Chairman, on item number 27 admin all concur with the Senate vote items.
28 authorized a transfer of 5.74 million from the Resilient Maryland Revolving Loan Fund to the general fund. The Senate rejected.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Item 29 authorized a transfer of $5 million from the Pediatric Cancer Fund to the general fund, and the Senate rejected.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Item 32, as introduced, authorized transfers of $198.8 million. The largest of this was from the cybersecurity. It included some PAYGO funds and about 0.35 million from miscellaneous expenses. On the top of page 4 and 32 admin alt, the administration offered an alternative to replace the miscellaneous operating expenses transfer with a smaller amount and from specific purposes. The Senate rejected the alternative, and instead they adopted most of the original provision, except for they struck the miscellaneous expense portion.
Mr. Chairman, on item number 32 and 32 admin all concur with the Senate on both items.
Item 100 DLS additional. This was a recommendation to authorize a transfer of $25 million from the dedicated purpose account that was for critical maintenance at state parks to the general fund. The Senate modified this to authorize a transfer of 14 million.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
If you turn to page 5 on the BRFA tally sheet at the top of that, 102 DLS additional. DLS recommended clarifying how the full-time equivalent student count is to be calculated for the public 4 years in the Cade, Sullinger, and BCCC formula. The Senate modified that to alter the calculation to be based on the actual enrollment and actual expenditures from the two prior year actual enrollment and expenditures.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
103 DLS additional would authorize a transfer of $7.5 million of various unspent funds in the dedicated purpose account related to kind of hospital, assisted living, and nursing home support to the general fund, and the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
104 DLS additional would authorize a transfer of $4.5 million from the dedicated purpose account from the LEAP program that were not used, and the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
105 DLS additional would specify that the $10 million distribution to the local income tax reserve account for fiscal 2026 to 2060 repays a $350 million transfer to the education trust fund, and it ends the distribution after fiscal 2060, and the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
Item 108 DLS additional near the bottom of that page would reduce some PAYGO funding from fiscal 2022 for the demolition of the Bard building at BCCC by $2 million, and the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to adopt 108 DLS additional. Concur with the Senate.
On 200 admin additional, this would expand the allowable uses of fiscal 2024 PAYGO miscellaneous capital grants of the Living Classrooms Foundation to include insurance expenses as an allowable use, and the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
And the last item on the Burford tally sheet is item 301 ENT additional, which authorizes a transfer of $150 million in fiscal 2024 from the local income tax reserve account to the general fund, which is represents an over distribution to the account net of canceled repayments, and the Senate adopted.
Mr. Chairman, move to concur with the Senate.
And then, Mr. Chairman, in your decision documents, starting on page 71, were the additional adds section that the Senate put in, but our understanding is you have a proposal that will deal with those pages separately. So that concludes everything we have.
Okay, so let's go ahead and move this decision document.
Mr. Chairman, move to.
I'm sorry, Delegate Metzger.
I just, need to say the statement on page 64, really worked very hard to get the community colleges funding. I'm glad to see that we put 12 million back in, or 10 million back in, but we worked very hard on that. And I thank you for
That
working.
was something the Senate and the House did in combination. We had hoped to restore the entire amount before we had the most recent write down. So we were proud to get that amount back in. And thank you for making that point. Thank you, Delegate. Can we move the Burford tally sheet, the color pages, and the full committee decision document?
Mr. Chairman, move to adopt the full decision document, the Burford tally sheet and full color pages.
Okay, any discussion on any of that? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, raise your hand. They are adopted. At this point, I think we're gonna pass out some House ads. We've seen the Senate ads, so we're gonna give you a second to look at those, and then we'll adopt this sheet. And then we'll pause for a minute and we'll take up some additional Burford amendments. Everyone have the additional ads? Any discussion or question on the additional ads, House ads? All right, if everyone can exit quietly, if you're done business here. All right. Without comment on the additional House ads, I will move the additional House ads.
Second.
Okay. All in favor of the House ads, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Those are adopted. Let's pause for 2 minutes. We're going to welcome the Chair of Ways and Means and Chair of our Transportation Committees, and we're going to take up some additional BRFA amendments. So just pause here, stay where you are for just 2 minutes. Pleased to be joined by Chair Atterbury and Chair Corman, who will be here for any questions on our BRFA amendments, as well as our subcommittee chairs, Feldmark and Carr. So welcome. Great to see you all. Chair Corman, you couldn't stay away, huh? You know?
This is my first
Oh,
decision
yes.
day.
Well, welcome, Madam Chair. It's great to see you. So just hold tight. We're going to get the documents out and we'll get going. All right, we are ready to go through. Council is going to walk us through the committee amendment.
The amendments do a lot of things. The first amendment increases the vehicle excise tax rate from 6% to 6.5% and alters the trade-in allowance against the vehicle excise tax. From July 1st, 2024 until July 1st, 2029, the trade-in allowance is 100% of the value of the vehicle traded in if the buyer is purchasing an electric vehicle. The trade-in allowance is 25% of the value of the vehicle traded in if the buyer is purchasing a hybrid vehicle. If the buyer is purchasing a gasoline or diesel-powered vehicle, there is no trade-in allowance. After July 1st, 2029, the trade-in allowance is permanently repealed. The amendments require, beginning in tax year 2028, affiliated corporations to submit a combined income tax return, reporting and paying tax on worldwide taxable income as a combined group, reflecting the aggregate income tax liability of all members of the combined group. The comptroller must adopt regulations to implement the bill that are consistent with the principles adopted by the Multi-State Tax Commission. The amendments establishes the annual electric vehicle surcharge on vehicle registrations. Amounts of surcharge are $125 for zero-emission plug-in electric drive vehicles or fuel cell vehicles, $100 for each plug-in electric drive hybrid vehicle, and $75 for hybrid vehicles that do not have plug-in capability. Surcharge is indexed to inflation moving forward, may be paid in installments, and the proceeds go to the Transportation Trust Fund. The amendments increases fines for a maximum of $40 per citation to until December 31st, 2024, a flat $80, and on January 1st, 2025, a flat $250. Proceeds to purchase state police vehicles expanded to include highway and work zone safety purposes and state highway system preservation. The amendments increase annual vehicle registration fees across the board based on weight class. The amendments authorize installment payments for annual vehicle registration fees. The amendments establish a transportation network company impact fee on any transportation network service passenger trip. The impact fee is 75 cents for each passenger trip, 50 cents for each passenger trip if the vehicle used is a plug-in electric drive vehicle or a fuel cell electric vehicle, and 50 cents for each shared passenger trip. Impact fee is indexed to inflation going forward. Proceeds distributed for transit capital and highway user revenues. The amendments expand the purpose of the Maryland Trauma Physician Service Fund to include the documented costs of trauma healthcare practitioners, altering the reimbursement methodology. The amendments specify that a level 2 trauma center is eligible for a maximum of 26,280 hours of trauma on call per year. The bill also alters the maximum reimbursement rate for all on-call costs. The amendments increase the annual surcharge on vehicle registration fees, supporting emergency medical services. The amendments also increase the portion of the surcharge distributed to the trauma fund, ensuring that a constant level of funding for shock trauma with at least $7.60 of the $40 surcharge required. The balance of the surcharge is paid to MEMSOF. These amendments increase the maximum fine for conviction for a first or second DUI by $200 and $400 respectively, and directs 20% of the fines collected for guilty dispositions to the trauma fund. The amendments repeal the train commission beginning in June 1st, 2024. The amendments provide that it is the intent of the General Assembly that the Department of Transportation allocate the revenues raised from this act to restore and, if feasible, enhance allocations to highway user aid to local governments, locally operated transit system grants awarded, operating shortfalls in MDTA, state of good repair, state highway system preservation projects for highways, roads, and bridges, state highway, road, and bridge projects that were removed or deleted from the CTP, and continue planning and development for the Maryland's future's transportation needs, including Red Line and other significant capital projects. Those are all the amendments before you.
So first of all, I want to thank Chair Corman and Chair Atterbury and your committees for your hard work in coming up with these revenue packages. I know that you have been busy the last 2 weeks in subcommittee, passing these out of subcommittee and making sure we have a tight package. And I think it's important, committee, to reflect on what these amendments do and what the work of these two great committees have accomplished. We have now shored up our trauma fund, right? We have shored up our shortfall in trauma. We have one of the best trauma systems in this country. And we are now going to have that flush so that they can move forward and do the work they can do. We should also acknowledge Subcommittee Chair Shetty and her great work all summer in this regard. We've also now shored up our Transportation Trust Fund, right? We are able to restore today highway user funds for roads and bridges for our locals that have been cut from the budget. We're able to restore the $3.4 billion that we saw cut this fall at MDOT for projects everywhere in the state, touching every member of this General Assembly. We've shored up local bus services at MDOT, so no one will be waiting for a bus. We've shored up, we've made sure that we have money moving forward for major projects so we can look at the next phase of transportation. Additionally, we've come up with over $500 million to pump into public education to make sure that we are keeping our commitment, as Chair Atterbury has said time and again, to the students of this state and the children of the state, children who for far too long have been promised a world-class education only for us to turn our backs when times get hard. So I think that is what these amendments do through the work of these two great committees. Is there a motion on the amendment? The amendment's been moved and seconded. Is there discussion on these amendments? Chair, we don't have any questions. Chair Corman, Chair Atterbury, you're here, so do you want to say just a couple of words since you're here? We thought we might have some questions, but Delegate Grice. We're voting on these amendments right now. Would you like a roll call on the amendment or right? Okay, we can do a roll call on the amendments. Before we do that, let's let our chairs just talk about the process that they followed in their committees to produce the amendment we've seen here today. Chair Atterbury.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for having us today. Good afternoon, or almost good evening, committee. I want to acknowledge my two subcommittee chairs and local tax guru experts on the Ways and Means Committee, Delegate Feldmark and Delegate Polakovich-Carr, who were also here for if you had any questions. So you're absolutely right. These issues were individual bills. They went through the subcommittee. The subcommittees worked on these issues and voted them out as they are amended in the Bertha. I keep saying Bertha. This is why I'm not on appropriations. And so that's what you have before you today. I'm really proud, Mr. Chair, to say honestly, to have worked very closely with you on these issues the past couple weeks, along with Chair Corman. Not only has it been actually kind of fun, but it also has been really important. Anyone who knows me knows that I am down here to make sure that all of our children in the state are afforded an equal opportunity no matter where you live. I'm incredibly passionate about it. I believe that to my core. And so I think focusing on the blueprint and focusing on that commitment to our children is what we need to do. So thank you to you and your team for helping us to get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you all. Similar process followed in the Environment and Transportation Committee. I really want to thank in particular Patrick Tracy and Rebecca Stryer on the committee staff who have done amazing work, both on the bills individually and then helping to make them into amendments to the Bertha. I just want to note that the bills are a bipartisan package of bills. We took bills from ideas from Democrats, ideas from Republicans to put together a package that we thought helps address the transportation shortfall, which is quite real and is now. The budget you are voting, I hate to say this, includes cuts for transportation absent these revenue raisers. So it's really important that you all are taking this action. I also want to acknowledge Chair Love, the chair of the Transportation Subcommittee, who worked these bills through subcommittee before they came over to you all. So thank you again for taking this on.
One more time, the general fund total package you're voting on is $525 million. The transportation package, $675 million, and the trauma fund package totals $105 million. Delegate Grice, did you have a question?
I don't have a question, but I do want to offer some comments. And I certainly don't want to be a buzzkill here at all. But we all come here to the General Assembly representing different parts of the state, and each one of us individually, we have different ideas on where our government should go, how big government should be, but the situation that we're in now is pretty daunting. And I think how we're going to approach, those challenges that we're going to have, not just in this fiscal year, but moving forward, there is a striking difference, I think, among many of us on how we're going to address these challenges. And so we go into this session, $500,000 in the red, and that doesn't even include the most recent revenue write down. And so we did make some very modest cuts to the budget, but most of those cuts were just one-time cuts. We didn't, shake down state government to find efficiencies in all these different places. As a matter of fact, we passed a lot of bills out of this committee that created new programs, that expanded existing programs. And all of the new spending really did cast a shadow on the small amount of cuts that we were able to make, in this budget. And next year, we're looking at just under $1 billion in the red. And that's assuming that we're not going to have additional revenue write downs. And the challenge that we have, and this is what was presented to us, was it last week or week before last, by the comptroller's office, is that there's a disconnect between where we think the economy really is and the performance of the economy. And where we're projecting these revenues. And we don't know if that's going to change or it's not going to change, moving forward. And, unless, unless we take a look at our structure and we take some really serious look at becoming more efficient, and seeing if we can provide existing service with the amount of people that we have, rather than going out, and with this blitz on hiring new people, and we're growing our state government at a much higher pace than our economy is growing, and that's very concerning. And we're talking about a revenue package here. And again, what we're doing with this is we're taking money out of the economy. We're taking money away from, mothers, fathers, grandfathers. We're taking money away from families. In order to be able to fund these programs. And I don't want to, disparage any of these programs. They're all going to do wonderful work for somebody in our state. Every bill that passes out of this committee, I will never say anything negative about any of these programs because they're great programs. The problem is how do we pay for it and who's going to pay for it? Inflation right now has a grip, not just on the state of Maryland, but our entire country. And people are really struggling right now to pay their bills. And by passing a revenue package like this, it's going to make it even more difficult for people to pay their bills, to pay their expenses. We're adding to that cost of living by raising taxes, by raising fees. And I'm very concerned moving forward if we continue to take money out of the economy and we make things even more difficult for families, that things, we talk about, being socially responsible, and many of the bills that we pass, we can make the argument that it is socially responsible. But when we're taking money away from hardworking Marylanders, I'm going to argue if, whether or not, we can call that socially responsible or not. Again, this is a difference of ideology, different perspective. But I think that we're better served, keep allowing folks who live in our state who are already struggling to keep their hard-earned money. So I certainly, I won't vote for the amendment. I certainly, this for the first time in 10 years, I'll have to vote against the BRFA, but I do intend on voting for the budget. But I wanted to make these statements because moving forward, there's some concerns, and I think that the thoughts that I just expressed are similar concerns that many Marylanders may have. So, but I will end it there.
Thank you, Delegate Rice. Thank you for those comments. I think you make a good point in one regard, that for too long these problems have been ignored, and ostensibly by our prior administration, who I see Secretary Grady here. I feel for Secretary Grady and this administration, who has inherited a transportation trust fund that has frankly just been neglected by the prior administration and ignored and underfunded. And now we're at a position where we have to sort of make choices. And these are hard choices, right? But the question before us is what do we do about it? Do we neglect our roads? Do we neglect our bridges? Do we neglect our transportation and transit systems? Or do we find the money to sort of bolster them and provide the services Marylanders expect? I wish we had had this conversation when we should have 4 years ago under Governor Hogan, but we are where we are now. So we have to, I believe, vote for this package and make these tough decisions. Delegate Anderson?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's good to see you all. How y'all doing? All right?
Good.
Good. As you know, I've been fighting for how we use the revenue since 2009. When I first started meeting with then Governor O'Malley, working on the one-time grants that would come out, and then We passed the legislation in 2018, then we passed it again in 2022. And I want to thank Chair Barnes for bailing me out several times through those processes. So I know this has been something that everybody's fought for and wanted to do. And then we finally get to the point where we've restored it. And then the next year it's taken away again. And so it's kind of this back and forth. And I see stuff, from the, previous administration talking about, how the good of a physical shape they left Maryland in and all this. And then I realized, that, I was here. I know how those budgets were made. They were borrowed dollars from the U.S. Treasury Department. That's what was used to fill the gap as you cut taxes, but you didn't cut spending. You replaced it with the COVID dollars that was given out, hand over fist, $8 trillion worth, that my grandchildren and yours will be paying off someday. I appreciate the fact that you're looking to find ways to shore up our trauma. I have a trauma facility in Salisbury. I hope to never need it, but I'm glad it's there. And again, it's good to see that you're doing something for, the EV, for electric vehicles, to pay into the system. For far too long, they've been, no pun intended, riding free, and so to see them contributing, I mean, it's good. I can see myself being inclined, because I fought so hard for how we use our revenues, being a former mayor, knowing how important it is to be able to provide clean, safe streets in your neighborhoods, because, the clean, safe streets lead to clean, safe neighborhoods, lead to a higher quality of life, which just expounds upon everything. And so, if this piece was separate, I'd be inclined to vote for it because of that purpose, because it fulfills something that I have worked on and fought so hard for years, decades. But with it all together, and the other increases and things like that, I have to agree with the delegate from Caroline County. I mean, for the first time in a decade, I'm going to have to cast a no vote on a BRFA or something related to the budget. And I'm really struggling with that because I've never done that. It feels almost hypocritical to me. So, I'm going to, do it begrudgingly. But if this were to show up separately, it'd be a different conversation. So
and check their own conscience, but it does mean a lot, I think, to the committee. Your expression of support for the transportation portion of this package, I think, is really important. So thank you, Delegate. Delegate Heineball.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I share the concerns about the BRFA, but I'd be remiss if I didn't go on the record expressing support and appreciation for what you've done in the transportation area, the CTP, highway user revenues. I'm also a strong advocate of fully funding the trauma centers. So while I may have issues with the BRFA, I do want to go on record as saying, representing Western Maryland, I strongly support the transportation related issues that are in there. So thank you very much.
Really important, given that a number of those road projects that were cut are from Western Maryland. So thank you. Delegate Acevero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to everyone involved as far as putting together this revenue package. I just wanted to echo your comments, Mr. Chair, about the importance, but really all of us asking ourselves what it is that we are comfortable with cutting if we do not find a way to pay for these very important services and priorities. So also wanted to agree with my colleagues that I think it's great that we, as far as the transportation piece of this, that we were able to find the revenue necessary. And my hope is that going forward, when we talk about revenue, when we talk about prioritizing all the important programs from education to transportation to housing, that we are looking more broadly at revenue and how we can ensure that we're generating revenue. Folks on this committee and other committees may be aware that Maryland is one of those states that have a very regressive tax code. People who can and should be paying more, corporations that can and should be paying more, are not in our state. And we have to make the very difficult and real decision of figuring out where those revenues should come from. My hope is that moving forward, we could look at those who can and should be paying more, i.e. the 1%, because it's good to see that combined reporting is in this revenue package. I think it's long overdue. But we also need to look at those who are wealthy and well-connected in our state who can and should be paying more money. I believe Maryland is one of 42 states that tax our 1%, way less than what we tax working class people in our state. So we got to look at that as well. And my hope is that going forward, when we talk about revenue for all the other important priorities that we have in the fiscal years coming up, that this will be a part of the conversation, that we'll be looking at the wealthy and well-connected, in addition to combined reporting, in addition to the excise and vehicle tax, et cetera, that, you know, we're considering today. But that's just my hope, that we don't just limit this conversation to these priorities of these amendments that we're voting on, but going forward, we really look at our very regressive tax code and how we can get the money that we need to pay for these priorities. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I certainly intend on supporting the BRFA.
Thank you. Delegate Metzger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me just talk from my heart for just a moment. You know, I don't want to be spiritual, but my Bible tells me that I'm to pray for my leaders. And in this room, you're my leader. Delegate Chang is my leader. Governor Moore is my leader. These that sit at the front desk is my leader. Those around me are my friends. And there's times in life that you have to take the bold step. And may I say, you just have to trust those who you admire and pray for. And I will tell you that this will probably be the toughest vote that I've taken. And I'm going to support this all the way through and trust the judgment and trust the Heavenly Father that He'll guide and direct us for coming forward. But this is very difficult for me, but I'm standing firm and standing for something. Thank you.
Delegate Mangione.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the committee chairs for being here. And, you know, this is difficult for me because I do want to support what this body does. And I will say here, although I'm sorry that I will not be voting for this and I will not be voting for the budget, but I do not intend to demean the efforts that the chair puts forth, that you put forth, that every single person back here puts forth, and especially the subcommittee chairs and the staff here. But for me, I do believe we're in extreme fiscal situations right now. And I am just not prepared to ask any Marylander, especially the Marylanders in my district, to put forth another dime of their money in tax or another fee. And it's very simple for me. And I know sometimes I may look at it. I mean, you guys have the very difficult challenge. I mean, all these documents here of making it all work. And sometimes I break that down to what is going to happen to the pocketbooks and the wallets of the people that are my neighbors and that live right next to me down the street, all the way up in the Pennsylvania line in North Baltimore County. And I just am not ready to ask them to pay more. And that's why I just cannot support this, because I'm fearful of whether or not this even attempts to address the long-term structural deficit. I do understand the transportation challenges that are real and that this may address that, but again, it addresses it in a way that I'm not willing to support. So I will be voting no, but again, I do not know how you all do it with all these documents and make it try to work in the way that you think it should work. And I may disagree, but I appreciate all your hard work.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Stanko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the two of you for your time and your committee's time on this. I'll use it, I guess, for lack of a better term, omnibus solution to the revenue or the revenue expense misalignment we have. Those that know me and that have worked with me down here in the short time I've been here know that I do my best to try to find balance in any of the solutions. And it's why I'll be supporting the Ways and Means Chairwoman's bill that's coming up in the next couple of days as an alternative way to raise revenue without raising taxes. And so I say that is, I I wish, as much I can appreciate that this was done as one package, I wish it was separated in a couple of different amendments. I agree with whoever made the comment about the trauma fund. I wanted to support the trauma fund. I spoke on the floor a couple of days ago about wanting to find some alternative ways to fund that, including a bill that I disagreed with how the revenue, where the revenue was going to be sent to. But I think it's important for my constituents that that I make it known that this is not the budget that myself, speaking for Delegate Greist, and some others in our caucus, that how we would design this budget. And I'm hoping and hopeful that I say budget, sorry, BRFA. I'm hopeful that the governor continues with his thought process, which is that he has a very high bar for what tax increases are required. That's been a consistent statement he's made since his campaign, as he's been elected and throughout this year. And I would encourage my caucus to continue to try to find alternative ways to raise revenue that does not impact our taxpayers. And so with that, I appreciate the work that was done. I can't support the BRFA in the way it's designed, but just wanted to kind of make that quick statement.
Thank you so much, Delegate. Do you think, Delegate McComas?
I didn't want to say anything because I'm usually the doom and gloom, and I am the doom and gloom. I think it would have been, in other words, I don't like omnibus bills. I like a single subject. And so I honestly, in good conscience, can't vote for this, but I will be honest, I'm very impressed with all the work that the two committees did, the two chairmen, and I know you all work very hard, and I know you're all very passionate about education and transportation. But unfortunately, people are really suffering in my district. Okay, and we're kind of middle class district. We're not you know what I would say a Title I district. But the problem is that the ones that are in the Title I are probably getting more crunched than my district. But I can't go back and say, okay, we're going to raise all these fees and things, and it's going to cost more to sell your car and everything. So with that saying, you all are very, very smart. You're all very, very competent. The staff has done a wonderful job, but at the end of the day, how you go forward with finances is you try to find ways to save, and you be discerning, and you can't have everything. And the governor has a lot of initiatives that sound good, but we don't know if they're going to work or not. And so I think he should kind of go slow. And you know, we can blame prior administrations. I mean, that's the way you do things. I mean, that's the way everybody does it, the new guy on the block. But at the end of the day, he was left with a good financial situation. And we're not doing some of the things that I would be doing. I wouldn't be doing, you know, rearranging the drapes and putting in new furniture. We need more folks with the public defender's office. We need more folks in parole and probation. We need more folks in corrections. And I don't see we're doing those, which are kind of more important than all this wraparound and on all this fancy education. I mean, I don't think Kerwin's going to work. I think, well, anyway, I just want to commend everybody for all the hard work they did, and don't think that me voting a different way just doesn't recognize the hard work y'all did.
And I appreciate those comments, Delegate McComas. We come from different perspectives, and certainly I think some of us on the other side of the aisle firmly believe that wraparound services in public education and our public education system is working, can work, and will work. With that, I think we can take a voice vote on the amendment, and then we will do a roll call on the BRFA. All in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, raise your hand. Delegate Greist, Delegate McComas, Delegate Stanco, Delegate Mangione, and Delegate Anderson are no on the amendment. The amendment passes. Is there a motion on the Budget Reconciliation Financing Act? All right, it's been moved and seconded. A reminder that without the BRFA, the budget remains out of balance. With that, roll call on the Budget and Reconciliation Financing Act.
Vice Chair Shagan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. To explain my vote. Thank you very much. I vote yes. Let me explain my vote, Mr. Chairman. As a state, we have a lot to be proud of, and that's the investments that we make, whether it be education or trauma or the roads, the other infrastructure assets that we have. And we really lead the nation. Maryland doesn't lead it by chance, but we lead it by nation because of the decisions that we make, the investments that we make. For example, with the trauma system, we have the world's, not just a nation, but the world's best trauma system. And 98% of patients who go there by helicopter or by ambulance, in the worst severe condition, they're able to come back home to their families. And that doesn't happen by chance. Doesn't happen by roll of the dice. It happens because of the critical and strategic investments that we make as a body. And on that, that's why I'm voting yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Delegate Smith? I'm voting yes. And may I explain my vote, Mr. Chair? Thank you. I want to just let everyone know that some of the programs we talk about them in an abstract way. But I send my two children to a community school, so I'm in one when I'm not here every day. And I see the growth not only in the students in that particular school, but just earlier this year, it was released that Baltimore City had the greatest increase in schools that were moving up the star rating. That is what the blueprint is rendering, is bringing forth, bringing those additional supports so that teachers can teach and other people can ensure that families are healthy and whole. But I also represent the jurisdiction that has the highest concentration of transit-dependent residents. And so oftentimes people say, well, I don't need this or that, but there are a lot of people you depend on that need that to get to you, to help you when you go to the hospital, to take care of your loved ones that are either very old or very young. There are often people who need transit to do a lot of things that you enjoy. And so as someone that represents people that need to get somewhere to work, to learn, to play, and perhaps to even catch some religion, they need that transit to do that, but also representing people who didn't always get the best first chance at a public education. And we have shown through our values and commitments to the blueprint that that is something we should be doing as a state in fulfilling our constitutional obligations. I am taking a sober but very heartfelt vote yes here because I feel like it's the least we can do. And the last thing on transportation that I think we failed to lift up is that we lose out on federal matches and sometimes other matches if we do not have appropriate funding up front. So sometimes a cut is actually a bigger cut than it looks like because it's not prudent to leave money on the table that we need to finish transportation projects across the state because we don't have enough money to get federal support. So for that, I'm happy to vote yes.
Yeah.
Delegate Lewis.
Thank you, and I will be voting yes on the BRFA and explaining my vote, Mr. Chair. I just want to say that, look, we are all aware of the fiscal condition of all of our constituents that we share across the state. And we know that when people are in tough times, they need a strong infrastructure, both in the physical infrastructure for transportation, as well as in our schools and throughout all of state government. When people hit a hard time, that's what we rely on, right? You can't, there's no point of us being here as elected officials if we're not going to ensure that when people need their state, it is well resourced. And the one-time maneuvers that we're using to get through are not going to hold us over for darker days in the future. And I just want to be clear, because I know some of our colleagues across the street are in the belief that, maybe next year we'll have a stronger economy. Our nonpartisan staff pretty much said we're in a good economy right now, right? So what does that signal? That signals that the future is probably not going to be as good as it is now. So it's time for us to put a deposit on what our communities deserve. And I hope and pray that, if I hit hard times, we have a state with strong infrastructure so I can get to hospitals and my kids can get to their schools. And those schools, particularly in my neighborhood, which is a concentration of poverty location, will have the wraparound services to help lift me and my family up. So I'm a strong yes, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Shetty.
Thank you. I will be voting yes. And to explain my vote, please. I would like to say that one strong note of gratitude for the Chair of Ways and Means and Chair of Environment and Transportation for fully vetting these proposals within your committees. You all have done a very heavy lift in bringing these ideas forward. Many of the fees that are included in here have not really been raised in a really long time. But at the same time, our needs across our systems in transportation and in trauma in particular have increased. So we were so, we really benefited this term, I think, or this session from having a lot of information shared by experts on the needs of our trauma system and the solvency of the MSOF fund going forward. So I'm grateful for these targeted and strategic investments that are going to be made in trauma, in transit, and education, and in transportation as a whole. All of these projects benefit all districts, all of our constituents across the state. And so for that, I am a strong yes. Thank you.
Delegate Watson.
My vote is yes, and to explain my vote, Mr. Chair. My subcommittee, Transportation and Environment, started this session with the idea that Marylanders trust us to keep their roads and bridges and transit safe. And we did an exhaustive study we had many, many hearings, probably hundreds of hours looking at every specific cut in the 22 agency budgets that we review. Republicans and Democrats did a fantastic job analyzing these cuts. Our hearings were often twice as long as they were last year, and for that, we definitely apologize to the staff. But what we learned and what we found is that without this BRFA, real, solid impacts to our Marylanders are going to happen. When other delegates talk about the pocketbooks and people are suffering and we can't have everything, we do need to provide a level of safety, and we do need our Marylanders to feel like they can trust that our infrastructure is sound. So if we don't have this BRFA, we don't have safety upgrades for some of our highways, which means we have more car accidents, which means we have more fatalities. It means if we don't have this BRFA, that we'll be sitting in traffic longer, not just this year, but in many years into the future, if we don't pass this BRFA. And it means that many of our Marylanders will be damaging their cars, hitting the potholes that aren't being filled because we don't have the funds that this BRFA provides. It means more unsightly roadways with weeds and trash that many people complain about to us. It means less security at BWI. It means less security at the Port of Baltimore. And it means that dozens, maybe hundreds of our 3,000 bridges will not be improved or maintained as scheduled. It means a less safe transit system and fewer options for people on trains and buses. And then frankly, if we don't do it this year, we know we will be back next year to take these same votes, only it's going to cost that much more. So again, we know that Marylanders trust us to keep their roads and bridges safe. And I believe, and I'm voting yes, because I think that the BRFA puts trust back in the Transportation Trust Fund.
Thank you.
Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I vote yes, and just very briefly to explain my vote, I know we have to get to the floor. Just want to thank the committee and the speaker on the childcare changes. That is one of the most exciting pieces to me in this, as well as a whole variety of other things. But that is an area where we have made incredible strides as a state to support working families, to support families in need. We hear from the business community constantly that childcare is one of the biggest problems they have in attracting the workforce, and we have taken incredible steps forward in this BRFA to make sure that we are supporting families across the state. Thank you. Proud to vote yes.
Delegate Grice.
Thank you. I'll be voting no, and I already have one bite at the apple, and I'll be very brief. Just two very quick points. When we're in a situation we are with this huge structural deficit, we have three options. You can either cut your expenses, you can raise taxes, you can do a combination of both. And from my perspective, I think we can do more in the way of streamlining government and take more cuts at the same time as revenues. And secondly, I'm just going to repeat what I said before. I'm just very concerned that our government is growing at a much faster pace than our economy is, and I'm just afraid that we're not going to be able to sustain this over time. And that's the reason why I'll be voting no. Thank you.
Delegate Ivy.
As a graduate of the Prince George's County Public Schools, I'm excited to be voting. I'd like to vote yes. And I don't think I have to explain my vote anymore. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Jones.
I vote yes. Thank you for the work that everyone has put in. I know we have to get to the floor.
Delegate Anderson.
Again, support the transportation piece of it, but for now, we'll be voting no.
Delegate McCaskill.
Thank you. I just too want to thank everyone for all their great hard work, but I have a hearty yes for this.
Delegate Rubb.
Thank you. I vote yes, and thank you for restoring over $70 million to Baltimore City's roads and bridges.
Delegate McComas.
No.
Delegate McComas is a no. Delegate Spiegel.
Yes.
Okay. Delegate Stonko. Delegate Stonko is a no. Delegate Mangione.
Yeah, thank you. No as well.
Sorry. Okay. Delegate Wolick.
Thank you. I'd be voting yes. And I'd just like to say that this is the first opportunity I've had as a new member of the committee. And feel very confident that I'm representing my district by voting for education and trauma funding as well as transportation. Thank you.
Delegate Heimbaugh.
I've had to make a lot of tough decisions during my lifetime, particularly my time in the military. While this may not be life or death, it is a tough decision. I take it very seriously. Maybe I'm the only one. I get caught up in what I really believe and the position of the people I represent. And it's a real dilemma for me. But for that reason, I vote no.
Delegate Acevedo.
I vote yes, and thank you to everyone for their work. We cannot cut our way to a balanced budget, and we can't austerity our way to a strong economy. Taxes are what we pay for a civilized society, and we need to ensure that we're taxing the right people and the right corporations. So my hope is that when we come back in future sessions, we can be looking at the wealthy and well-connected and how we can raise revenue for the other important priorities. Thank you.
Delegate Metzger.
I vote yes, and I'm going to trust the judgment.
Delegate Edelson.
Yes.
Delegate Edelson is a yay. Delegate Harris.
Yes.
Delegate Harris is a yay. Delegate Forbes.
Yes.
Delegate Forbes is a yay.
Chair votes yes.
Chair is a yay.
BRFA passes. Thank you all. We still have to vote on a budget, but before we do that, let's let our great chairs get back to work in their committees. Again, just a thank you for all of your hard work. Please share on behalf of the Appropriations Committee with your DLS staff, with your members, with your subcommittee chairs. Thank you so much for your work on this. Thank you all so much. BRFA passes, and we are going to now move to the budget of the state of Maryland.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for all your work and all your leadership, and thank you to the entire committee. On that note, I'd like to move that the FY25 operating budget be moved.
Budget has been moved and seconded. Before we vote on that, I just want to give a couple of thank yous. First, to our Department of Legislative Services staff who work all night. It is an understatement, but I will say we quite literally could not do this work without you, and we know the hard work you've done all session. Thank you so much. Also, our committee staff who put in countless hours as well. Thank you all. And Michelle. And, you know, in some ways, appropriations chair is one of the easiest jobs around because we have such strong subcommittees and such strong subcommittee chairs. So I just want to thank the subcommittee chairs for the great work. And the best vice chair in the General Assembly. Is there any discussion on the budget of the state of Maryland? Okay, roll call.
Yes. I want to, from the minority's perspective, I want to actually echo exactly what you just said, but I want to add one more thing as well. And is that, you know, you guys have all, from all of our perspective, you guys have become friends, you know, and one of the biggest things going in, not just this job, but anywhere in life is you have to be able to trust who you're working with. And one of the things that we can say when we walk away from here, we do trust you guys as individual members, as a body. And that means something because, you know, it eliminates a lot of anxiety. You guys are very transparent. Everybody's been very transparent in everything that we're doing. The voting lists come in a very timely way. It gives us time to be able to digest everything that we're voting on. And, you know, so I certainly want to thank, staff for that, and I want to thank, leadership for you guys working very well with.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Delegate. We might not always agree, but I do think that the minority voice on this committee is collaborative and oftentimes quite helpful, even when we disagree. So thank you for doing that in a really productive manner to all the minority party. With that, let's roll call.
Vice Chair Chang. Yes. Vice Chair Chang is a yay. Delegate Smith. Yes. Delegate Smith is a yay. Delegate Lewis. Yes. Delegate Lewis is a yay. Delegate Shetty. Delegate Shetty is a yay. Delegate Watson. Yes. Delegate Watson is a yay. Delegate Solomon. Yes. Delegate Solomon is a yay. Delegate Grice. Yes. Delegate Grice is a yay. Delegate Ivy. Yes. Delegate Ivy is a yay. Delegate Jones. Yes. Delegate Jones is a yay. Delegate Anderson. I love y'all. Delegate Anderson is a yay. Delegate McCaskill. Delegate McCaskill is a yay. Delegate Ruff. Yes. Delegate Ruff is a yay. Delegate McComas. No. Delegate McComas is a no. Delegate Spiegel. Yes. Delegate Spiegel is a yay. Delegate Stonko. Yes. Delegate Stonko is a yay. Delegate Menchion. Delegate Menchion is a no. Delegate Wollick. Delegate Wollick is a yay. Delegate Heimbaugh. Yes. Delegate Heimbaugh is a yay. Delegate Acevero. Yes. Delegate Acevero is a yay. Delegate Metzger. Yes. Delegate Metzger is a yay. Delegate Edelson. Yes. Delegate Edelson is a yay. Delegate Harris. Yes. Delegate Harris is a yay. Delegate Forbes. Yes. Delegate Forbes is a yay.
Chair votes yes on the budget of the state of Maryland. Congratulations. Great work, committee. Let's give a second for our great staff with DLS to sort of funnel out, because we do committees stay tight. We have about 5 or 6 bills to vote on, but thank you all again as you leave. Thank you for your work. All right, we're back. I think we're secondary on most of these bills, so council will handle them. Delegates, House Bill 228, council.
Okay,
228.
House Bill 228. This is a departmental bill that does not affect spending, and it extends the deadline to spend certain funds in the DNR Parks Critical Maintenance Fund from 2026 to 2029.
Bill was unanimous in E and T. Can we do a voice vote? All in favor, say aye. Opposed, raise your hand. The ayes have it.
Mr. Chair, there are two
Sorry.
amendments.
I'm sorry, retract that. There are two amendments. Go ahead.
So Amendment 1 is technical. Amendment 2 clarifies that the authorized use of the park system will be used to expand access to parks and alleviate overcapacity, and requires the DNR to report on expenditures.
Okay, amendments have been moved and second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendments pass. Bill's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Opposed, raise your hand. The Delegate McComas votes no. Okay, the bill passes. House Bill 1070, council.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
He's a good counsel. He would be a great counsel, I'll tell you.
Bipartisan but not unanimous vote in the Environment and Transportation Committee. Amendment number 1 is technical. Amendment number 2 raises the cap on agency revenue bonds and transfers certain amounts to be transferred to the Transportation Trust Fund. Just to be clear, the amendments alter the bill so that it becomes a repayment from the Maryland Transportation Authority, the toll authority, to the Transportation Trust Fund for the $750 million that the trust fund provided MDTA to build the intercounty connector. And those payments will be made $75 million a year for 10 years until we reach the $750 million. We do not direct how the tolls are set or anything like that in the legislation as amended. I was about to move the amendments, but I don't think I can do that in here.
Okay, move the amendments. All in favor of the amendment, say aye. Opposed, raise your hand. The ayes have it. The amendment. Okay, on the bill as amendment, is there a motion? All right, been moved and seconded. So this is part of our transportation package. As Chair Corman said, it was not unanimous, but it was bipartisan in his committee. And it is part of what we use to restore HUR and the like. It is part of the package that just is not as part of the BRFA. So with that, why don't we, it basically repays the MDTA.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We no longer dictate the toll structure in the bill. We let the Maryland Transportation Authority maintain their independence, and they can set the tolls as they see fit. As you know, Delegate Anderton, whatever we do in this room, they will be raising the tolls within the next few years. They've been very open about that. We just want to leverage that opportunity to have them make this repayment back to the Transportation Trust Fund to help shore it up. They have discretion in terms of how they're going to raise the tolls. They have projections about what they think they need, Delegate Anderton, but we're not telling them how to raise them. It's not mandated in there.
Delegate Corman's taught me a lot. Remember, MDTA is its own fund, and so this would be a transfer into the Transportation Trust Fund so we could fund HUR and the like.
This is taking that out and then it's up to them.
Yes.
Looks like it's going to be bipartisan here as well. Is there any other discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, raise your hand. Delegate McComas, Delegate Stanco, Delegate Mangione are no. The rest are yes. The bill passes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. See ya. See ya. House Bill 819, Council.
This bill expands the purpose of the catastrophic event count in the federal government employee shutdown assistance loan fund. That funds may be used to provide financial assistance to federal non-civilian employees, in addition to federal civilian employees as authorized under current law. This was not unanimous in ECM.
Okay, bills are moved and seconded. Is there discussion? 819. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, raise your hand. Delegate Stanco, Delegate Mangione, Delegate Metzger, Delegate McComas, Delegate Greist are all no. The bill passes. House Bill 1157, Council.
As amended, this bill establishes the Grow Your Own Educator Grant Program to provide support to eligible non-certified education support professionals and eligible provisional teachers interested in teaching who pledge to fulfill a service obligation administered by MSDE. There are two amendments. Amendment number 1 is technical. Amendment number 2 allows provisional teachers to qualify for support as part of the program. It was unanimous in Ways and Means because the funding mandate was removed.
Delegate McComas is a no, but the bill passes. Where are we? House Bill 1426, Council.
1426, as amended, makes alterations to numerous education-related programs in the state, including post-college and career pathways, pre-kindergarten information sharing, early childhood professional development, and educator student loan assistance programs. There are two amendments. The first is technical. The second strikes provisions of the bill related to the Nancy Grasmick Public School Professional Award, authorizes MSD and AIB to limit the types and number of courses that duly enrolled students may take, authorizes for the 2024-25 school year that the KRA to be completed according to a relaxed schedule, and fixes technical errors in the education code.
Okay, amendments been moved and second. All in favor, say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. This was not a unanimous bill in Ways and Means, but it was bipartisan. I think Delegate Wims voted for the bill in Ways and Means, if that helps anyone here. Bill has been moved and seconded. Is there discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, raise your hand. Delegate Grice, Delegate McComas, Delegate Stanco, Delegate Mangione are no's. The bill passes. House Bill 1441, Council.
This bill, as amended, was unanimous in Ways and Means. It makes changes to the public pre-K program by creating a private career ladder standard and having different requirements for public pre-K providers. They're also extending a number of pre-kindergarten credentialing programs that were set to expire. The bill extends those till 2030.
I think we have to move the amendment. All right, I'll move the amendment. Amendment's been moved and seconded. All in favor, I say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Any discussion? The bill's been moved and seconded, unanimous in Ways and Means. All in favor, say aye. Opposed, raise your hand. Bill, Delegate McComas is a no. Otherwise, the bill passes. Committee, great work today. Great work this week. We will be probably voting tomorrow morning, so listen on the House floor for my announcement. But otherwise, we're adjourned for today.